Good evening. How are you guys? I'm going to be doing something a little different here today. I am going to be reading the tribute to. Okay, back up a bit. Today is September the 11th. For those that don't know, on 1918 in Versailles in France, there was basically the World War One ended with an armistice. It was the 11th day of the 11th month on the 11th minute of the 11th hour. It's very symbolic. But basically, it's called Armistice Day or Remembrance Day, or in the US, Veterans Day. And I thought to commemorate that, because Irish men were on the front lines in World War One as part of the British Army, I would read the tribute to the Irish war dead, written in 1928 by Marshal Foch, who was the Supreme Allied Commander at the time in World War One, after an awful lot of political manoeuvring, it has to be said. And I thought I would do this because the Irish dead of World War One and World War Two are pretty much forgotten about in Irish history. Now, I could rant about this all day, but essentially there isn't a family in this country that didn't have men in the British Army, and women. I mean, Irish women served as well, but we're not supposed to acknowledge that. I mean, because of my father's Jack Shaughnessy, he served in the RAF in World War Two. Served in the Battle of Britain. Am I supposed to just forget that? I probably have relations that I have no idea about, but that nobody talks about. But that's just the way we Irish seem to be. We just don't want to acknowledge stuff like that we should be proud of. And I think we should just acknowledge that yes, Irish men and women did go off and serve in the British Empire, and we should be proud of the stuff that we should be proud about, and not be proud of the stuff that we would not be proud about that they did. But we should tell the truth that they were there, because that's part of what we are. I'm speaking English. I'm not speaking Irish right now, and we as a nation decided to change our language to English, and it's been very successful for us. We've spread all over the world as a result, and we should acknowledge that. And I'm not saying anything against anybody who likes Irish. I mean, that's fine. I mean, I got nothing against Irish as such, but we have to acknowledge the truth of our history. And our history was that we had men and women at the front lines in World War One as part of the British Army. So, and unfortunately, other people are more willing to say nice things about the Irish, the Irish soldiers there, than we Irish are. So let's actually listen to what they say. I mean, I only read this about maybe 5 years ago, and when I read it, I was like, why isn't every Irish child taught this in school? Because this is pure Irish pride we're talking about here. But anyway, I don't get to make those decisions. Probably for the best. Anyway, Marshal Foch, he was, as I said, he was the Supreme Allied Commander. He was commander of the Somme, and he was commander of the Second Battle of Marne, which is pretty much where the last German offensive hit the Allied lines. Now, to be fair, most of the troops under his command there were French, but there were elements of the British Army in there. So he's saying that, and it's pretty much as described. The Germans pretty much hit them head on, and they didn't shift, they didn't move, and they were held off, and then that gave time for an Allied counterattack to surround them and hit them from all sides, and the offensive broke, and that pretty much. And that was in July, and that pretty much was the effective end of the war. Germany surrendered 100 days later, after gaining the initiative again. So let's actually listen to what the guy has to say. This was published on the 10th of November 1928. Foch died the next year in March, but yeah, it was published in the Irish Times, and. Let's hear what he had to say. Paris, France, Friday, the November 9th, 1928. The heroic dead of Ireland have every right to the homage of the living, for they proved in some of the heaviest fighting of the World War that the unconquerable spirit of the Irish race, The spirit that has placed them among the world's greatest soldiers still lives and is stronger than ever it was. I had occasion to put to the test the valour of the Irishmen serving in France, and whether they were Irishmen from the north or the south, or from one party or another, they did not fail me. Some of the hardest fighting in the terrible days that followed the last offensive of the Germans fell to the Irishmen, and some of their splendid regiments had to endure ordeals that might justly have taxed to breaking point the capacity of the finest troops in the world. On the Somme. Never once did the Irish fail me in those terrible days. On the Somme in 1916, I saw the heroism of the Irishmen of North and South. I arrived on the scene shortly after the death of that very gallant Irish gentleman, Major William Redmond. I saw Irishmen of the North and the South forget their age-long differences and fight side by side, giving their lives freely for the common cause. In war, there are times when the necessity for yielding up one's life is the most urgent duty of the moment, and there were many such moments in our long drawn-out struggle. Those Irish heroes gave their lives freely, and in honouring them, I hope we shall not allow our grief to let us forget our pride in the glorious heroism of these men. They have left to those who come after a glorious heritage and an inspiration to duty that will live long after their names are forgotten. France will never forget her debt to the heroic Irish dead, and in the hearts of the French people today, their memory lives as that of the memory of the heroes of old, preserved in the tales that the old people tell to their children and their children's children. A German tribute. I know of no better tribute to Irish valour than that paid after the armistice by one of the German High Command, whom I had known in happier days. I asked him if he could tell me when he had first noted the declining morale of his own troops, and he replies that after the picked troops under his command had had repeated experience of meeting the dauntless Irish troops who opposed them in the last great push that was expected to separate the British and French armies and give the enemy their long-sought victory. The Irishmen had endured such constant attacks that it was thought that they must be utterly demoralized, but always they seemed to find new energy with which to attack their assailants, and in the end the flower of the German army withered and faded away as an effective force. They never failed. When the moment came for taking the offensive all along our line, it was these same worn Irish troops we placed in the van, making call after call on their devotion, but never finding them fail us. In the critical days of the German offensive, when it was necessary that lives should be sacrificed by the thousand to slow down the rush of the enemy, in order that our harassed forces should have time to reform, it was on the Irish that we relied repeatedly to make these desperate stands, and we found them responding always. Again and again, when the bravest were necessary to delay the enemy's advance, it was the Irish who were ready, and at all times the soldiers of Ireland fought with the rare courage and determination that has always characterized the race on the battlefield. Some of the flower of Irish chivalry rests in the cemeteries that have been reserved in France, and the French people will always have these reminders of the debt that France owes to Irish valour. We shall always see that the graves of these heroes from across the sea are lovingly tended, and we shall try to ensure that the generations that come after us will never forget the heroic dead of Ireland. Wasn't that fantastic? Take care, everyone.